What's going on, guys? This is Jay and Joe from Sneaker Principal. And this episode of the Sneaker Principal podcast, I want to talk to you about staying. People always assume that staying at your school, in your district, in the city that you work in as an educator, is easy because you don't have to do anything but just stay. You don't have to pack up boxes. You don't have to say goodbye to anyone. You don't have to, go through the anxiety of anticipating a new environment. All the what ifs, all the unknowns, right? You just stay where you are because you're already there. You already know the people there. People already know you, and it's that simple. But I can tell you this: staying is probably the hardest thing that I've ever done. A lot of my friends and colleagues who have stayed where they are, or at one point in time stayed where they were, all share the same thing. The pain. I'm going to call it pain. The pain of knowing that you could be somewhere else, probably doing what you really want to do, but you're staying for a reason that most people don't even understand. Back in 2010, I had an opportunity to take on an assistant principal position at a school in Manhattan, a very well-known school, one of the highly selective schools that kids have to apply to get into. And I was told, hey, this principal expecting your call and has a position for you as an assistant. And the school I was at the time was definitely not to that caliber, but it was a school that I had become an assistant principal in. I've been part of its journey from almost being closed down, to being, identified as the most improved school in the city at the time. And but what was happening was there's a lot of change coming. People were leaving. My principal was leaving, and I was like, should I be going too? And once in one quick swoop, principal was leaving, the other assistant principal was leaving, and I was going to be the only man still standing. All three of us had come to the school together to push this turnaround work. And the time came, everybody had gotten their opportunities. One was put right in front of me, and I said, no, I'm going to stay. And I want to tell you why I decided to stay. Because the students who were there, they were very aware of what was happening. It was a 6-12 high school, secondary school. And all the kids were asking me, are you leaving? Are you leaving? Are you leaving? And it wasn't just like, are you leaving? Like, we want to know if you're still going. But it was kind of like are you leaving wrapped with fear. I heard in the kids' voices like they were not ready for change, at least not that kind of change. But they really did like their principal. They liked the other principal. They liked me as well. And it's hard when you're in a school where you can say, wow, all the admin in the building, we really like them. We like the teachers in the building. And they knew as most kids know who've ever been in a school, people leave. It's usually not just one or two people. When people leave like that, it turns into mass change, because people start leaving because in their minds they are nervous or afraid that people leaving meant new people were coming in, and new people who were coming in were not going to be as kind and loving as those who were already there. And again, we're talking about kids who had gone through many principals. They had gone through many changes in a very short period of time. And my being there with the leadership team that I came in with had created stability and stability and calm that they hadn't had, and honestly, they had never had in the school. And I don't know what, it just hit me. Like, if I leave, I was like, this is not going to be good for these kids, this community. And not to say that I believe that was like some kind of major factor in school stability, but I just hated hearing the kids and even parents saying to me, "Are you leaving?" But and they would say, "No, but seriously, are you leaving?" I would try my best, but no, I'm still trying to figure things out. Oh, you're leaving. But if you leave, what's going to happen? When you hear those words enough times, you become burdened with whether or not my actions were going to cause irreparable harm to the community. So I stayed. I stayed because I made a promise to the kids that I met when I got there. These were the seniors. They were 8th graders, and this change was happening right before their sophomore year. It was wrapping up their freshman year, and so it was 2 years in of being in that school, and I decided to stay because I told them I'll be there all the way till they graduated. I couldn't promise anything beyond that, but at least that senior class, that those kids, the older kids that I met when I was there, I'll stay with them, for another 3 years, which would be their sophomore, junior, senior year until they graduated. Now I'll tell you this, it did alleviate a lot of the stress of what's going to happen next if I go to a new school, or would I like it, all that stuff, right? But now I was part of their transition into new leadership. Because here I am, the only one surviving from the previous leadership, and new principal came in. There's a lot of changes. Then they brought in their people, and it became this kind of like weird space because I never quite felt like I was part of their leadership team. I was kind of like the leftover. I was we wish he had gone with them, but I stayed for the kids. Because I kind of became their protector. I kind of became their voice. I was the one there, an administrative team that understood the kids, knew kids' families, knew exactly what was going on. And the kids would only, for a while, would only talk to me. And, but I'll tell you this, it was hard because for me, after a while, I started to ask myself the question, did I do the right thing staying? Did I miss out on an opportunity, even though I was still an assistant principal? But I was like, when else would I get the chance to be an assistant principal or be on a leadership pathway at one of the best schools in the city? Not to downplay schools I've worked at, but the schools I've worked at have always been schools that were struggling or going through some kind of major change or needed some increase in stability. And here I was, with the opportunity to lead in a space that only a few ever get opportunity to lead, but instead I stayed. It was hard, but let me tell you the things that I learned from staying. How strong I was, because I stayed, and then I was being disrespected. I was being, minimalized. All the work that I had done was being ignored. And it's kind of hard to be in a space where you're like, man, I invested time and energy into the space, and now I'm being told that all the stuff I did was for nothing. But still, I have to look at those kids in their eyes and say, you know what, I'm still going to stay regardless. Through the disrespect, through the chaos, I'm still going to stay. And I'll tell you, for me, it highlighted, to me at least, my level of resiliency, my ability to weather the storm regardless. The other thing I learned was that even though after a while, especially seeing my colleagues who had left in these different spaces and they seemed to be so much happier, I started to believe I had settled. And maybe I hadn't been good enough. And maybe me staying was me really saying subconsciously that, I still had a long way to go to be confident enough to take on better positions and better situations, right? So I got the feeling like I was just settling, and it was okay to just settle. But what's interesting is I realized I wasn't settling. I realized that what I did was very was very. I'm trying to find the right word. What I did was something that went beyond just me, because I stayed to protect kids. I stayed to protect the community. So I wasn't settling. I wasn't stuck. I chose to stand my ground. I chose to say, you know what, I'm going to stay here and fulfill a promise I was going to make. And while fulfilling that promise, I was going to pour all of myself into that community to really support them, you know. And I took on the role of a protector. You know, for the next 3 years, there were parents who would only speak to me, not because I wanted it that way, but because I had truly given myself to the work and saying, you know what, I'm going to do this to make sure that these kids get the best of me and get the best of what could be offered at this particular school. The other thing I learned is staying confused people, which was a good thing. But some people just had this assumption that my staying was somehow connected to being weak. Like maybe I was too scared, or maybe I wasn't good enough to go anywhere else, so I stayed. And the reality is, no. Even though when I was there, I was more burnt out than I'd ever been before. I had more put on my plate than that I had ever been given. And some of it felt like it was being done intentionally to push me out. But I 10 toes down, I stayed. And the result spoke for itself. Because during that time frame, I mean, our kids were doing so well academically. We would have regents and I would see kids scoring in 90s and 100s. Like kids I'm talking about several hundreds, kids who were just fully committed to the work they were doing there. And sometimes I wonder if somehow subconsciously or maybe consciously they were watching me and watching those who stayed and said, hey, if they stayed for us, let's be present for them. And that's what happened. A lot of those kids now are educators and they're civil servants and they're medical practitioners and they're in law. And they're doing all the things that we tell kids you can do whatever you want to one day. They're doing it now. And again, a lot of it came from a space where we were fully committed to them, where I was fully committed to them. And I think that commitment planted seeds in them where they became committed to themselves and each other. And some kids I had some kids who tell me, like, mister, I'm here because you stayed. My mom was going to pull me up and take me to another school, but you stayed, so she decided to keep me here. Which, again, is an amazing thing to hear and to take hold of, and saying, like, yes, my decision was not just for me and not just for them, but it was totally encompassing of what was the right thing to do for the community. Staying also taught me to stand up for myself, to create clear boundaries. But sometimes when you stay somewhere for a long time, you become complacent and others become complacent of you as well. So you find yourself being treated some kind of way, being talked to a certain kind of way, because again, it's like you are here, so clearly you can be treated any way, especially when people feel like you stayed behind. But however, I learned to take a hard stance, create my boundaries, speak up. Because at this point in time, I felt like, you know what? Okay, I stayed, but that means something. And even though it wasn't easy, there were many times where I had to really let my principal know, let some people know around me that no, I'm not going to tolerate that. Like, do not take my kindness or my love for these kids in this school community as weakness. And so I learned, and slowly I started to learn to take care of myself, because I allowed myself to. Listen, I almost ran myself down. I was overweight, tired, exhausted. I was in bad shape, and that was where I started to really slow down and tell myself, okay, no, you Uche, you're a good person, you're a good school leader, and you're here because you're doing what is right, but do not allow doubt and pain and fear and all these other things to push you to a dark place. So I started taking care of myself. I started doing the right things, eating right, really tapping into joy, finding things that made me happy, and not allowing the work to weigh me down. Yeah. And I'll tell you this, the lesson that I learned is staying builds legacy. Yes, I've been turnaround principal. I've worked in three different schools. I go in, I do what I need to do, and I move on. And I know during the time I'm in my different schools, I'm making a lasting impact in those spaces. But however, if you were to ask me about my legacy school, it would be the school that I've been talking about. Because again, I got there. I was there for 2 years. Then everyone transitioned, and I stayed for 3 more years. So I was there for 5 years. And it's funny because those are the kids that I truly hold to my heart. They're all adults now, parents. They're married, living across the country. But I know that what I did there, I know now, was legacy work. It was the stuff that people always remember. And it's funny because there's been times where I've come across the school, at different events, and people work there. And strangely enough, some people come up to me and say, "You're Uche Njoku," and I'm like, "Yes." And they're like, "Yeah, I work at this school. I know about you." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, it's 2025. I left that school over a decade ago." But it didn't matter. People kept on will talk about the work that I did, the work that we did, and those who never met me, those who never saw me in that space, know of the work, know of me. And what else do you call that other than legacy? When you do work that outlives you. And that's not what we do this for, but however, it's important to know that when you stay, you have the opportunity to really plant seeds nice and deep. They're going to take deep root and become these mighty trees that no one can ever truly uproot. Because again, your essence, the work you've done, who you are, your values, become rooted in that community long after you've left. All right, y'all. So just remember, if you decide to stay, it's not a bad thing. Stay. Just know why you're staying, be reflective, and know what the mission is of you staying. And if you decide to leave, again, not a bad thing, because the skill sets you've developed, the abilities that you have, hopefully will impact many more kids. But yeah, that's it for right now. Uche Njoku, Sneaker Principal, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you all soon. All right, be well.